let's just go ahead and officially get started. I know people are going to join in as they come, and that's fine. So let me welcome everyone to coming. I looked at the list of people who were here, and I know some of you guys were here last week, so welcome back. Some of you, this is the first of this series that you've attended, so welcome for your first time. Jack Manning's here with us today. I'm going to talk about a little more about him in a minute, but first I wanted to thank Beaver County Behavioral Health. They are the ones that are sponsoring this series of webinars, and the whole purpose is just to kind of give everyone a little breather, a little space to kind of check in, talk about what is going on in the world, but also talk about how we keep ourselves strong and how we keep ourselves going. You know, I always say that our whole role is to save the world. So we have to keep doing that, even in a crisis. I also want to give a big shout out to Jen and Kim from ETC. They help with all the technical stuff, and they've spent a lot of time behind the scenes to get ready for this one little hour that you're going to see today. There has been tons of work behind it. So I really, really appreciate them, and they're always just fun to work with. We have 2 more sessions scheduled. This Friday at 11 o'clock, we have a session called I Drink Alone, and Kate Lowry, who is the Beaver County Single County Authority Administrator, she is going for drug and alcohol services. She's going to join us, and we're going to talk about services for addiction and what's happening in the world right now. We're also going to talk about how drinking and other drugs too actually are on the rise right now, and that happens in times of crisis. And we're going to talk about what to look for and what that might mean after the pandemic is over. And it is important. It's an important topic because even though we have this huge pandemic, we still have a opioid epidemic, which has actually turned into more of an opioid and stimulant epidemic, but we still have crisis in that area. So we want to talk about that. And then next Friday, which is the 15th, we have a session called Dancing with Myself, and Marie Timpano, she's the executive director from Cornerstone of Beaver County. She's going to be joining us. She's going to talk about homeless services and what's happening during this pandemic. We're going to talk about home life in general and how different it looks now than it did before the pandemic. And then we're also going to talk about the healing powers of music. So Marie is, in addition to all these wonderful skills she has in working with the homelessness area, she is also a drummer. And so we're going to talk about how important that is, that music can be very, very healing for all of us. I also wanted to say that this is, today is the right smack in the middle of Mental Health Awareness Week. And so green is the color. If you have green, I should have probably thought of that to wear green today, but I didn't think about it. But this is an important week to recognize that mental health awareness, mental health is important to all of us. We all have mental health, and we need to take care of it, particularly in times like we're dealing with right now. So glad that you guys are here. This is like the funnest part of my job right now. I miss being in the live trainings that I get to do with some of you guys, but this is at least something that I get to connect with you. So our guest host today is Jack Manning. He is the newest of our Beaver County commissioners. And how long have you been in that role, Jack? Just since January?
About 125 days or so. That's
but who's counting?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And Jack has a really great history in business and manufacturing. He also has a really amazing history of community service and volunteer work. And that's how Jack and I initially met. Was he was on the board at Gateway Rehab when I was a little worker peon there. And that's how we initially met and worked on some things together. He's also done some work for the Humane Society and lots of other volunteer work. And another thing, Jack, about you and your life, it's actually more about your wife. She's one of my idols because she has hiked the Appalachian Trail.
Yes, she has.
Has she hiked the whole thing?
Yeah. Well, yeah. So a little over 15 years ago, she walked from Georgia to Maine. So amazing. I have to be very careful when I say, why don't you go take a hike? She disappears for 6 months at a time. So
right.
Yeah, no. So quite an intrepid person, and that was an amazing feat to take 6 months off.
Absolutely.
And walk from Georgia to Maine. Yeah.
Now, has she walked on the trail since then?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, every year she does 2 events, and this year, COVID-19 is preventing her from going. There's an Appalachian Trail Day for the people that are on the trail every year. It's always the weekend after Mother's Day in Damascus, Virginia. It's kind of the halfway point between Mount Katahdin in Maine and the starting point in Georgia, the trail. And it's a big festival, big 3-day festival with campers and former thru hikers and stuff. She's attended that every year for the last 15 years since she walked it. And then in the fall, she usually goes for a little 80 to 100 mile hike with some section of the trail with friends of hers that she's met who are trying to section hike the whole trail. Okay. So they usually pick an area. She's kind of up in the air over whether she'll be able to do that this fall, but she's hoping. Yeah, she's hoping she does. Yeah.
I like how you said she goes for a little hike, 80 to 100 miles.
80 to 100 miles over a couple of weeks, yeah.
That has always been one of my, pipe dreams is to hike the Appalachian Trail. And it is amazing it takes 6 months if you're good. Yeah. It could take longer if you run into difficulties. Or you get into weather issues.
Yes,
weather issues, to get that time off from work, to be away. But I always think it's probably a very spiritual journey.
It is. And I'll just add that I could talk about her hiking this all day long with some of the stories and stuff. But, she had just turned 50 when she did that. And it was a lifelong dream to do that. I was proud that I was in a position where I could keep the house functioning and the animals alive while she was gone that long. But it really was, it's tremendous cathartic communing with nature, but beyond that, also the camaraderie and the goodness of people. It really, people from all walks of life, from emergency room surgeons to college kids taking a break, to families that were homeschooling and the whole family walked the trail. Just a priest from Ireland. I mean, she met just some amazing, eclectic mix of people, and they kind of sit around at night when they're at the shelters. It was just great conversation on kind of the camaraderie and the connectedness that we all have as human beings. Yeah. It really was an amazing journey.
Yeah. Maybe we'll have her on sometime too.
I'm sure she'd be glad to.
She'd be glad. Okay. So quick funny story. When I connected, now luckily Jack and I have known each other for a long time, and he knows me, and he also is a down-to-earth funny guy. So I reached out to Jack to see if he would help out with this webinar. And I sent him a text and said, hope you and the family are doing well. I was wondering if you could help me out with a webinar. And then I said some other things, and then I sent it. And when I looked back at it, the word webinar, of all things, had auto-corrected to wiener. So I actually asked Jack if he would help me out with a wiener.
Yeah. And I noticed it right I thought I was supposed to bring some hot dog rolls or something.
Right away, I was like, webinar. So that was how Jack and I reconnected for this for this webinar. Now, how does that? I don't understand how that autocorrect corrected to that. Like what?
That don't ask me, because
I don't get it.
I get frustrated by it all the time. Yeah.
All right, I'm going to share something on the screen here. So Jack and I are probably going to go away, and I want to share with you this slide. I'm hoping everybody can see this. This is a slide that talks about the phases of disaster, which is what we are in right now, is a disaster, and phases of disaster recovery. And what I think is so interesting about this is you can see, pre-disaster, and then the impact when things kind of started with the pandemic, with COVID-19, and then the heroics. That was one of my favorite stages of this. And one of the very first things I saw, and Jack, you could probably speak to some things you saw throughout the county as well, but one of the very first things I saw before I even realized that this was going to be a big issue, was in Brighton Township, right on Tuscarawas Road by the high school. A family had set out a table that said, They put a bunch of food items out there, canned goods and things, and they said, take what you need, leave what you can. And I just thought that was a beautiful thing. It's still up there. It's still running. Some others have opened throughout the county. People making masks for people donating food for first responders and for hospital workers. Those all come, that's all part of that heroics. Have you seen some of that, Jack, in the county too?
Yeah, and I hate to point out a few people because I know there's been a lot, but I mean, DJ Fry, who has Fry Busing, most of our impoverished school children rely on the meals from the schools. They closed the schools, and he and his bus drivers are delivering those lunch meals to every stop along the way for the kids that they would normally picking up to school so that they could get their school lunch, school meals and stuff. I just thought that was exceptional.
Absolutely.
Because at that time, you know, those drivers didn't have to do that, but they said, no, these are our kids, and, you know, they deserve to eat. And he worked with the school districts that he had that line with, and they're still doing it as of today. And that's just one example of how people just stepped up, and his bus drivers all volunteered to do that, and just remarkable.
It is.
Those efforts with the food pantries and the different things that are going on. But
absolutely.
just you know, the average everyday workers that we tend to take for granted that are at work still stocking shelves and helping us at Giant Eagle, still, you know, allowing us to function the way we are. A lot of people really have stepped up.
Yeah, you know, my daughter, Evie, she's 16. She works at Beaver Super, and she's been really just grateful to continue working. And sometimes people tip her. You know, one guy, $20. He said, thanks for staying open and doing this. So people, I think, if they sit back a little bit, they're very gracious about things that are still going on. And there's a lot of those heroics that are still happening. We moved through this recovery phase into the honeymoon phase, which I think is where a lot of us have been, where at first we were like, I'm going to make masks. I'm going to do all these great things. I'm going to work out every day since I'm working from home, and I'm going to cook healthier. And then we moved into the honeymoon where we kind of said, okay, yeah, we can do this. There, you know, I get to spend more time with my family, and there's actually some really good things about this. And then we moved down into the disillusionment, which I think is where a lot of people are now, in a space where they're saying, okay, I did it. I can do it. How much longer do I have to? You know, I just want life to get back to normal. And so that's where I think we're seeing some controversy now in the community, which is part of the process. What I do think is interesting about the slide too, is it talks about phases of disaster, that the true recovery and construction takes about a year before it starts. So we still have a long way to go to move toward recovery. Not that we won't see signs of recovery before then. In some ways, I think we already are, but it does take a long time. And I think that's important that we kind of stay patient about that. And then when I thought about this, I also then thought about this, which many of you have seen, which is Kubler-Ross's grief cycle. This is the original. There's now like 10 more grief cycles or phases that they have now. But this is a little bit of what everybody's going through, is we're in this pandemic and everyone is grieving the lifestyles that we had before because they're not the same. So we have the denial, the anger, the depression, and then we move a little bit toward acceptance. And that, I always think this graph makes the grief cycle look so smooth, but really it's more like this. You know, arrows everywhere, and we go back and forth between stages. And I think those are important things to kind of remember. What do you think about that, Jack?
Yeah, I agree. And I think what's unique about this one is the length of time. You know, most disasters, tornado comes through, or an earthquake comes through, or a hurricane comes through, and then it's over and we're going through those stages. This has been such a long, drawn out process that still isn't over, that's having the significant economic impact on people with the loss of income, in addition to recognizing the loss of life that's occurring here in Beaver County. So I think it's making it even more chaotic to kind of go through those cycles, because we're still not out of it yet.
Right. So it's kind of like it's a terrible analogy, but if you have someone, a loved one that is sick and they're terminal, and you start grieving while they're still alive, but everything's changing, and that you're grieving while you're still going through it. And that I think is what's happening right now. We're still in the thick of it, but we're grieving. And I think what's important too, Jack, is, this type of trauma, of a crisis, triggers old traumas in us to come back up. So things that maybe we had healed from mostly, or maybe we just tucked aside in some way to cope and didn't really think about it, this like rips those wounds back off again. And I think people need to be really patient with themselves, that this is a tough time and something that we haven't dealt with before. So one of the things you and I talked about, Jack, was the similarities between 9/11 and what's happening in this current pandemic. And I had a couple quotes that I wanted to say, and then I wanted to see kind of what your thoughts are. And I guess I want to preface this too by saying, I want to be really, and I know you do as well, really cautious, because these are very sensitive issues. And I realized that when I was working with a client of mine, who in 9/11, he still is. And in 9/11, he flew over the Twin Towers about 10 minutes before they were hit. And when he landed, he had no idea that had happened, but all these things that were kind of going crazy. And then he learned what was happening. It was very surreal, dealing with a lot of post-traumatic stress from that situation. And over the years, he's really done a lot of recovering and healing. And when this pandemic hit, he came to session and he said, oh my God, it's 9/11 all over again. And I can see it that way. I have, I think, I certainly have my trauma from 9/11, but I wasn't there. I wasn't on those front lines. I didn't fly over it right before it happened. So I think we want to remember when we're talking about this topic that this is a hard one for some people to talk about, but it's definitely important. So this is a quote from our U.S. Surgeon General, Jerome Adams. He said about the pandemic, he said, this is going to be our Pearl Harbor moment and our 9/11 moment, only it's not going to be localized. It's going to be happening all over the country. What are your thoughts about that, Jack?
Yeah, I think it is. It's difficult to make a perfect analogy for what we're going through. But I certainly recall where it was, like everybody else, at 9/11, and I had kind of 9/11 type angst with this, as this was starting to snowball and hit us. And I think everybody remembers where they were and what they did. I certainly do. I mean, my office was in Cherrington in Moon Township. Planes used to fly over our office building and land right out my window every couple of minutes. And how we dealt with that at the time in trying to figure out what we were going to do as a company. At that time, I was director of human resources, and we had 26 sales and marketing people and others that were traveling that day. So, you immediately revert into, okay, what do we need to do? What do we have to do? But it was so eerie for the next day or two not to have those planes fly over our office when we were still there working. And by the way, it took me almost a day and a half to track down all 26 of those people, because none of them were where they were supposed to be based on the manifest that we had when they set out that morning. They were from Nova Scotia to Phoenix, Arizona, and all over the place. Some of them had to drive cars to get back. And it was just and then we weren't quite sure what was happening. And I think I mentioned to you on a personal note, the Flight 93 thing really hit me and has stuck with me more than anything else. Because at that time, I was in a corporate role overseeing 10 different sites in Canada and the US, and I was on planes all the time, connecting through airports and driving to these locations. And 37 people on that plane and four crew members. And it was one of those, oh my God, that could have been me. And it just really, really hit me hard. And I admit, almost every time I've gotten on a plane since, I've had a little angst, a little moment, and a little reflection, and the like. So it sticks with you. And I think there's things that this is triggering, particularly for, maybe even more so for our senior population, who has suffered through different traumatic events, from World War II to the Vietnam War to some other things where it looked like, oh my God, our world's coming to an end, kind of a situation.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And I think we don't know what the long-term impact is going to be on our mental health, for example. And our mental health, it connects to our physical health. So that the stress that people are feeling right now is going to impact things in the future. And that's why why we do these webinars, is just to give everybody, invite everybody to have a chance to just breathe a little bit and just, yes, we're in the middle of it, but we're going to keep kind of pushing through. This other quote, this was from a policymaker. He said, while not a public health crisis, the terrorist attacks of September 11th were arguably the last moment in our nation's history in which the same feelings of shock, panic, fear, and uncertainty about the future rippled throughout. And I was thinking about that. I was thinking about all the school shootings we have, and how that brings the same kind of, I think, fear and panic, up. But in some ways, we've become a little bit immune to that, to school shootings. So we hear, oh no, there's another one that's terrible, and then we kind of move on. And this is different. This is staying with us over the long term, I think. Is that how you see it, Jack?
Yeah, I do. I think, the school shootings is perfect example of how you become numb to stuff, and this is a little bit different from that. I guess what I'm hoping from this, just like with 9/11, it spurred a whole generation of people into more public service, military, police. I think there was a positive change in people's perception of EMS and those guys, and we had a lot of people change career paths from that. I'm kind of hoping with this, that as people see who's on the front lines and who's responded, and as you probably know, I'm a huge fan of the nursing program at CCBC, and my older sister, who passed away several years ago now, was an RN, traveled around with her husband, who was a Presbyterian minister all over the Presbytery. She worked the last 20 years of her life at the VA hospital in Minneapolis. And I'm very passionate about that field, the stuff that you do, Jill, the counseling and stuff. So I'm kind of hoping that maybe this spurs, where there's a great need and a shortage of folks, some people think about, I want to be on the front lines with these kinds of things, or I want to come up with cures. I want to fight viruses. I want to be able to do research work on this stuff. I think that can be some of the good that comes out of going through something like this.
Yeah. Well, I do remember after 9/11, and there was a sense of camaraderie and connection between people that wasn't there right before 9/11 had happened. And that is one of the things, one of the great Chinese proverbs says, with crisis comes opportunity. And I do see some of that now with the neighbors in my community, for example, some of them who I've never really even talked to much. But now, people are taking walks more, and people are conversing a little more from a distance. And those are some of the really positive things, I think, that do come out of these, just like they did after 9/11. Now, when you were talking about 9/11 and the planes not going over, I think about the first time I went out driving somewhere to, maybe I was coming to work. I don't remember. Maybe I was picking up my daughter from work, but there were like no cars on the road.
Yeah.
It was the most eerie thing I had experienced. Or the first time that I went into the stores wearing a mask myself and seeing everybody else wearing masks. Those are some of those, like, it doesn't seem real. Like, is this really what's happening?
Yeah.
The same
You know,
time
it's.
Go ahead, Jack.
No, I was just to reflect one last thing. So that the day of 9/11, and we sent everybody home, emptied out the thing, and a few of us were hanging around trying to track down where all our people were. We quickly found out that none of our people were on any of the planes, but now we had the angst of all their family members trying to figure out where they were, and us trying to help and do that. And I think it was finally around 8:30 that night when I had done everything I could, and I got in my car and drove back to Chippewa down 376. And when I got in the car, after concentrating so hard on all that had just happened, and I called my wife to say I was on the way home, and I just burst into tears. It just, after 12 hours of concentrating on doing my job with like control and being, focused on that, and the fact that there were hardly any cars on the road, and I'm driving home at 8:30 at night, I literally just burst into tears.
Just lost it. You just had to like let it out.
I did, and cried all the way home, and then hugged my wife and the dogs and everything else, and tried to regroup to go back in the next day.
Right.
And continue to work, but it just all came out.
Yeah. Well, and my son was on 9/11. He was 9 months old, and I was at work, and he was with his sitter, who was this older lady who we just loved. She was like part of the family. And I remember calling her. So this, cell phones, people had cell phones then, but they weren't as they are today. So they weren't as many. But I remember calling the sitter saying, is William okay? Which seems kind of weird because of course he was okay. He wasn't on one of the planes. He wasn't, any of the places, but that feeling of nobody's safe right now, and particularly my kid, even my kid who is like this tiny little 9-month-old, he's just not, what if he's not safe? Like, am I doing everything to keep him safe? It's, I feel that way now. Like, I think about that with my daughter before the stay at home came into place and things were getting weird. I said to her, I'm thinking about not letting you go to work because, you're around all these people at the grocery store, and she was so cute. She knows exactly what buttons to press. She's like, Mom, it's a small business. They need me and I'm doing my part. And really she wanted to save money for a car, which is fine. And we actually came to an agreement at that point that she started wearing a mask at work before they had to wear masks. That was our compromise. But I still think about that now. Like, is that the right thing? Should I be keeping my 16-year-old daughter at home all the time? Are we doing everything to keep everybody safe? It's just so, and we just don't know.
No.
I just think we're all doing.
It's hard. Yeah.
Definitely. I just think we're all doing kind of the best we can. So I want to share this next slide. I apologize. It takes me a minute to get the technology going here. All right, we saw that one. Okay. So this is something I was thinking about, and the picture on the left is this valley, which is kind of how I see what we're in right now. We're in this deep, deep valley of this pandemic. But over on the right is a bridge, and as long as you have a bridge, then it's okay. It doesn't matter how deep the valley goes. We have a way to get through, and I think we have a lot of things that are helping us get through right now. I thought this was a really important quote and something to help all of us be patient with ourselves and with our communities, and from the community to the state to the federal level, is to remember that no one has navigated a loss during a global pandemic. This isn't something you should magically know how to do or have all the answers for. We just don't have all those answers yet. We'll be more prepared for the next one, right? If there is a next one. And then just to bring a little bit of humor, you know, I'm a big Britney Spears fan. So these are her 9 phases of, these are the stages of quarantine. So you can take a look. I was saying the other day, I think I'm like at number 6. Like I'm really enjoying the junk food and just kind of, you know, I do a session from home and then I go lay on the sofa and then I do a session and then I, you know, that's kind of where I see myself. But I would rather be here at 1 or 2 or even 3. Where do you think you are, Jack?
I've been all over the map, actually. But, you know, I have found myself, I mean, we're 2 months into this. Every once in a while, I find myself not being as diligent as I should be with some stuff, getting in my car, going into the store. I always have my mask on. I have my sanitizer and I have wipes and stuff and all that. And I found myself the last week or so being at the point where, oh, I forgot to, you know, wash my hands, or I forgot to do something. And, you know, we were kind of anal about this in the beginning. But, you know, I mean, 125 days ago, if you told me we were going to have to deal with a global pandemic in the courthouse, I never would have figured that out. I will tell you that early on, I asked, when I started seeing the reports and I was concerned about it, and having in prior experience with my chemical background, we had pandemic plans. We actually had those. And I started asking around the courthouse and got a few blank stares about that. Well, we have emergency disaster plans. We have this plan. I go, okay, well, I think it's something we ought to think about. So we quickly formulated a plan, but there was no roadmap for this. So we've done a pretty good job managing on the fly and going through some of those stages. And while we do have one significant issue in the county that's really outside of most of our ability to control, the things that were in our control, the courthouse, we've managed well, and closing it down to the public, but still keeping part of the courts opening, and the courts are functioning, and the sheriff's department, the jail, and our 911 center, you know, they're still taking the calls and they're still manned and stuff. So we have 800 employees in the courthouse, and we've managed to, I think, effectively pull together, keeping that functioning and keeping some degree of normal. Because if your government services aren't there to do all this, it would have been 10 times worse. And I give a lot of credit to the behavioral health people, to our children and youth services folks, to our Department of Public Works folks, to our Sheriff's Department, to 911, to the jail, the correction officers. All those folks haven't missed a beat since this has been going. They're all dealing with personal issues as well. But I'm very proud about how the whole community, but particularly the folks that we have purview over here at the courthouse have handled this, because it hasn't been easy for anybody.
Absolutely. And I can actually attest to that, because just yesterday, our carbon monoxide detectors went off, and got all the kids out and called 911. They answered quickly. The fire department was there within, you know, just a few minutes, and they took care of everything. And it turned out it was a fluke. So that was good. But I think that does, you know, show that everybody is still taking very seriously what they do, and then what's going on. So there are some good things that have come out of the pandemic. I think we've kind of touched on some of those, but here's a list of them. These come out of Forbes magazine last month. Well, actually the month before, in March. One is that we have more time. And I don't know that we have more time, but our time is distributed a little bit differently for many of us. And I think this depends on the person, because, you know, I'm still working. Jack, you're still working. A lot of people are still working. But our work life has changed. It allows us a little more flexibility. Do you feel that?
Absolutely. And I have a lot of people I know are really reflecting on what's important during this time, when they have all this time to think about what should they be spending their time on, and what should they be concentrating their future towards right now. There's a lot of reflection going on. Yeah.
Well, and I think too, and you know, Jack, I'd shared with you a little bit about my son and how he's thinking about going to community college in the fall. And I'm not sure that he would have gotten there if I hadn't been around as much as I have been the last 2 months. I wonder if that maybe spurred, because he and I had a lot more conversations about it, and we had a lot more just reflecting. So I think those are some really positive things. The opportunity number 2 is kind of just what you said, opportunity to reflect and reconsider. You know, what are their values? What do we want our lives to look for like going forward? One of the other things, I think this is a real important one, is speed and innovation. So I said to my kids a couple of times, I can't imagine being your age, being a teenager, when I was a teenager in the 80s, if this would have happened. Because we couldn't have done online schooling. We didn't have cell phones. We couldn't do these types of interactions. It would have been a very, very different world. So the fact that we have some of the technology and that we're able to use it the way we are is good. So they said one of the opportunities of the pandemic is better meetings. What do you think about that, Jack? Do you think we're having better meetings?
Better what?
Meetings.
Oh, I'm not having any less number of meetings. I will tell you that. There's a lot.
But are they better? Do you think they're better in quality?
I actually do. And I believe one of the positive outcomes will come out of it. So for instance, we have 800 county employees, a little over 800 county employees. We were able to get almost 250 of those to be able to work remotely, telework, and the like. And even, although most people don't have to deal with this, but the courts and the jails doing stuff visually instead of transporting people back and forth or having people have to come in to the courthouse. The technology, I think that if nothing else, this will spur an ongoing better way to conduct business, more efficient, more effective way to do business going forward. I don't expect us to back off on some of this stuff now that we've managed it and gotten through it and done it. It's a little frustrating sometimes fighting for bandwidth on the Wi-Fi because the systems seem to be overloaded. But I think overall these are great, and I expect some of the ongoing boards and things that I'm on. This is the way we're going to do it, rather than the 3 commissioners and us driving to Washington County for a Southwest Corner Workforce Development Board meeting. Why do it when we can do it this way?
Yeah.
So I think it'll be a positive outcome.
I'm hoping that after this is over, we strike a good balance, because there is still so much that happens in an in-person meeting, kind of off the record. That's important stuff, but it doesn't always happen. And these types of meetings, I think, can be just as effective most of the time. So hopefully we'll
I agree.
There.
Yeah, I agree.
Opportunity number 5, to reconnect and to help with others. Opportunity number 6, a cleaner environment. So I've seen some memes and some jokes where people are saying, "Oh, I finally put gas in my car after 6 weeks." You know, those types of things. Less cars on the road, less pollution. Those are good things. And then opportunity number 7, modesty and acceptance, that no matter how well planned and organized we are, we can recognize that we're only in control of so many things. And I think those are important. I think a couple other good things that have come out of this, you know, in my world with doing therapy, we're able to do telehealth sessions, and HIPAA restrictions have been lifted, which in the long run is important that we get those back in place. But in the midst of crisis, it's a good thing that those have been loosened. Some insurance companies, UPMC, for example, UPMC commercial, are paying all co-pays for telehealth sessions. That's important to some people who have a $60 copay when they come to therapy, that they can get that covered. Highmark is starting to pay for some of them as well. Just depends on the contract. And then there was this issue that wildlife, you and I talked a little bit about this, Jack, that wildlife is actually thriving better than it has in a long time. So this quote says, "It's clear that the lockdown of humans is helping nature and biodiversity rediscover their natural spaces. With the lockdown, nothing is happening. It's dead quiet, and animals like fin whales, other marine species, are clearly rediscovering their confidence and peace, allowing them to come closer to shore." So that was one example, but a lot of really great things with wildlife. So speaking of wildlife, I wanted to share, Jack, some of your wildlife. Let's see. This just takes me a minute, sorry. Okay. Look at these guys. Tell us about these two.
I don't see them up on the screen yet.
Oh, no, you don't see them?
No.
What do you see? What do you?
I have your get off of my cloud Word document.
Okay, I don't want you to see that. Can you see them now?
No.
No.
I still don't.
This is not helping me. Okay.
Okay.
Let's see. Can anyone else see them? Okay, let me just try to share them again. Share my screen. How about now?
Oh.
Can you see them now? Okay, good.
Now I can see Brooke and Daisy. Yes.
Brooke and Daisy. So Brooke is on the left.
Brooke is a 13-year-old rescue that we've had now for 13 years, a Spaniel Lab mix. And Daisy is a Beagle we've had a couple of years now, also a rescue from the Humane Society. And they are my constant traveling companions when I go on my Saturday morning errands. And if anybody follows me on Instagram, you'll know I have my Saturday morning routines. And this happened to be a Halloween when we showed up at the dry cleaner. So they were decked out last Halloween.
That's one of my favorite things about Saturday morning is to see where you and your critters are going.
Yeah.
Then we have this picture of you and your wife. There's your sweet wife walking.
Yes.
Is this in Bridgewater?
That's in Bridgewater, down Bridgewater Landing there. Yeah, it's a beautiful spot. That was last fall. We had some photos taken, and they love it down there.
So here's Brooke.
That's Brooke.
That's Brooke.
She is the sweetest, kindest. She would be a great therapy dog. I mean, anytime she goes somewhere and people, can I pet your dog? I said, oh yes, and please don't stop. She'll sit there all day if
She
you're going
loves
to pay
it.
attention. But she is just a sweetheart. She's just she listens to me best of anybody in my whole family. So when I talk to her, I was talking to her at the time when I was taking this picture. She was concentrating on what I had to say.
She is. Yeah, she's definitely concentrating. Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah.
Now, who's this one?
That's Mikey. Mike is our 18-year-old cat, also a rescue from the Humane Society when we moved in 20-some years ago. We got him. We've had him 18 years. He thinks he's a dog. He walks around with Diane and the rest of the dogs during the day when they go on walks and stuff. And truth be told, he kind of rules the house. If he wants something, he'll take it.
He'll take it.
Yeah.
Here's you with the dogs again.
Yeah. You know, I don't know. We've had dogs our whole life. Diane and I have been married 45 years, and we've had, probably 8 to 10 pets, mostly rescues. There's just something about the unconditional love of dogs and animals that's just very important to have. I know in our lives, and I think most people with pet owners, their lives.
Well, that's definitely another of those really healing things. So families that have pets and critters at home, they're getting extra support. And we haven't had a pet in our home for the last couple of years, and we're currently working to get a kitten. So we're excited about that.
Well, the Humane Society's got plenty of
yes.
if you're interested.
Yes. I saw a funny cartoon the other day. It said that with everybody being home now, the dogs think that we are staying home because we want to be with them, and cats think that we're just losers and all got fired. So I thought that was kind of funny.
Yeah.
So a couple more things I wanted to run through, Jack, just about being resilient and how we're going to get through this. This is one of the slides I've used a couple times when I've spoken to really share with the two things that we can focus on now the most that can help us is our routines and our connections with other people. So one of the things we know when I've done critical incident debriefing, after there's some sort of immediate crisis and we try to help people get a little more settled, is we know that keeping their lives as normal as possible is really healthy. So getting to bed at the same time you do, getting up and having breakfast, going to work if you can, and working out if you usually do. And those are really helpful things to help the head and the heart heal after crisis. So in this crisis, which we're still here, if we can continue that, that's really important. And then the connections, and they might look different, but it's important that we still have connections with other people. You have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I agree. You know, I've been in the people business my whole career. I mean, I was a director of human resources, and there was a plant manager, and then Chamber of Commerce, and then I ran for office. I mean, I thrive on person-to-person contact. So while I appreciate the Zoom meetings and stuff, there are times when I go, geez, I need a little more person-to-person interaction. It's just part of that. And I'm really going to struggle post this because I like to shake hands. I like to get hugs and give hugs, you know, to family members and friends and all those things. And it's going to be interesting navigation as we go forward in what becomes the new normal from this, because that's inherently who I am, and I thrive on that contact.
Yeah, I agree. I'm a hugger. So this has been tough. Now, Jack, a couple of things you and I talked about. Hopefully I can share my screen here again. Okay, can you see my slides now?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So a couple of things, Jack, that you and I talked about was one of them. Things that we have over, things that we don't, our circle of influence. Can you talk a little bit about this and how you feel like it applies to what we're going through today?
Yeah, I mean, it's an important part. It's been an important part for at least the last 20 or 30 years of my career, of some leadership training that I had about your circle of concern. And, you know, there's a lot of things that we're concerned about. But there's also things that we have direct control over: how we act, how we behave, what we can do. Just like 9/11, I couldn't control what just happened with those planes, but I could control trying to find out where our employees were. So I diligently went through a process. I had a responsibility and I had control over that portion. There are also things that we're very passionate about that we can influence with the help of others and collaborate on to get things done. I'm dealing with several of those in the courthouse where we don't have direct control over certain situations, certain organizations, certain institutions, but we're applying as much influence as we can with the people who can make a difference to make a difference. And then eventually we all have to accept that there's some things that may never change we're concerned about, and some things that are inherently cultural or so far out of our control or influence that they're just there. It doesn't mean we're not concerned about them, we don't worry about them, but we can't concentrate on that. I always go immediately in every role I have, because every role I go into, that circle of concern changes. It changed from my chamber days and what I had control over, what I could influence, what I was concerned about, to now understanding what my direct control is as a commissioner, what I can influence, and what I'm concerned about. So that's an evolutionary thing that happens during the course of someone's life, and particularly if they change career paths or family situations change or whatever. But this is what grounds me whenever things get stressful and I feel like things are getting out of control. I focus and make a list of, well, no, here's what I can do.
Well, and I think the thing I like about that too, when you and I were talking about that yesterday, Jack, is that we have so many skills that we have used throughout our lives when we've started a new job or we've had crisis in family and we just have to remember that we just use those same skills. We have those skills. We might look different in this circumstance, but they're the same skills. So, you know, we have them. I think that's important. I picked out a couple other slides that you did, Jack, because they really spoke to me. This one about synergizing. if we can really focus on valuing the differences and the diversity. What struck me about this is, you know, you see these things on social media where people are like, you can't force me to wear a mask. And then other people are like, you're putting me in danger by not wearing a mask. Well, let's just allow people to have their own opinions and respect that. And, you know, if we want to educate people about our own opinion, I think that's great. But let's allow some diversity there as long as it's safe. Seeing the world as we are, that, you know, the world, I think overall is a beautiful place, but it has some very ugly spots to it. And when there's a crisis, we're going to see those. And so let's just be kind of open about it, and to certainly be respectful of each other when we're sharing things. So that one spoke to me. And then this one spoke to me, the areas of Fort Disciplined, because we need to take care of all four of these areas for ourselves right now in this pandemic. Like, we need to make sure that physically we don't get sick if we can, and emotionally and socially, mentally and spiritually. So did you have anything to add to that? I just always like that kind of holistic sort of approach.
Yeah, a couple of things, and this is again something that I've been applying, and it's consistent with some lessons I learned from other folks where I saw that synergy, and that synergize slide is important to me, and it's those are core values and core principles that I function by. You can't solve a problem or make things better if you don't face the reality of how we are, right? So, you know, you can't solve something by trying to be idealistic about, well, I wish it was this. Well, face the world as it is, face reality as it is, and now we can go about doing that. And how's the best way to improve things and solve problems is having different perspectives, valuing differences, valuing the diversity of thinking that people bring to the table based on the diversity of experiences that they have. And always respecting individuals, that there are differing opinions on all kinds of things. I'm certainly seeing that in multitudes here in the commissioner's office. But I respect people for their, I see things a different way, but I make decisions based on the facts as I know them now, and as the reality is setting forward on how we need to change things for what is the best interest of all Beaver Countyans and everyone in order to move forward and make things better. All the while trying to respect people for who they are. Even some of the nasty emails I've gotten, I still send them back a very respectful, which may annoy them even more, but very respectful email. Thank you for your feedback. I appreciate your opinion and your input. Here's what we're doing. And, you know, stay safe, take care,
right.
You know.
Right. Well, and sometimes I do think people just need to be heard. And
yeah, absolutely.
Responding back and saying, okay, I heard you, and this is what we're doing about it, and it doesn't fit in with what you're saying, but at least then they, okay, well, Jack, that guy listened. He heard what I had to say.
Yeah.
And that
well, I had a 20-minute phone call with someone who there was nothing that was in my power to actually help them. But I listened to them for 20 minutes, some haranguing, some crying, some thanks. And I listened, and then at the end they said, thank you. But I really, all I did was listen for 20 minutes on the phone and give them the attention that they were crying out for, even though there was nothing I could do to intervene and help with the
right.
situation they were doing. And I think listening and empathy has always been a big part. And I believe if anything, our country has this empathy deficit that is really disturbing, that people can't put themselves in other folks' shoes and understand what's happening, and at least have empathy for that, and understanding of what it's like to be in that person's shoes and situation. I think it's so important, and right now we need it more than ever.
Definitely.
Listening and empathy.
Well, and I think our younger generation, like my kids, have that more than my generation, let's say. You know, I always tell my kids they're like little greenie weenies. Like, they're always open to other people's differences, and, you know, well, maybe this is why they did it this way, Mom. And I'm thinking, okay, oh, you're right. So I think they're, you know, as the generations go, they're even more open to that, and hopefully that'll do something good for us in the future. So one last thing that Jack and I wanted to share was when Jack and I were together at Gateway, we both had a very close relationship with Dr. Neil Caputo, who has been gone now for a while. And just a magnificent man who impacted so many people's lives. And I said to Jack just yesterday, I even think about just recently, I thought, oh, I'm going to call Neil and ask him this question. And then I thought, no, I can't call Neil and ask him that question. So he was so much a part of our lives. And I think sometimes what direction and what kind of influence would he have on us right now during this pandemic if he were here? So they have renamed one of the units up there at Gateway to Caputo's Cove. And that's, of course, Neil in the picture there. Jack, along with Karen Frioli, who's vice president, I think, of operations now. And
Operations at the, it's Center Township,
Jack, Paul Bacharach, who's their president and CEO. So just warm thoughts that we have about Neil. We wanted to just honor him.
Yeah, and I think, if you look at that sharpen the saw slide that you had, lessons that Neil taught me that have stuck with me. He always said the drug treatment and ability to turn your life around was a four-legged stool. And he talked about the physical aspects, the psychological aspects, the sociological aspects, and the spiritual aspects. And when you look at that sharpen the saw, I found myself adhering to those, particularly during this. You mentioned keeping to a routine. I'm on an exercise bike 30 minutes every night. I'm still getting up at the same time, getting dressed, going in, even though it's not the full days that I was doing in here in the same way that it was before. So, that physical acuity and staying healthy by being physically active is important. The mental health it focuses on that circle of concern that been talked about, making sure that our mental health is fine. The social aspects are one of the most challenging, right? Because we're not having quite as much face-to-face contact, but having these kinds of meetings, having that kind of interaction through social media, through Facebook, although I'm not a huge social media fan, most of my Facebook postings are the dogs and that kind of stuff. I don't want to get into any heated debates with folks, because that could be mentally taxing rather than liberating. And then spiritual, Neil always talked about this. It didn't have to be necessarily in a religious sense from a formal religious standpoint, but if you don't believe in something greater than yourself, bigger than yourself, more important than yourself, then you can't have that full recovery. And I don't think you can sharpen your saw and stay effective unless you have that. And for me, coming home every day, reflecting on my family and the dogs and my kids, and I have a grandson that's in Tokyo with a granddaughter right now. Everything that motivates me is trying to make the world better, trying to make the community better, and trying to reinforce the importance of family. So that spiritual connection there is important. But all of those aspects, and Neil was just a master in educating and helping people with that. I think about him all the time. I reflect on that model. I repeat that model to everyone. When different subjects come up, you just can't focus on Narcan when you're dealing with this.
Right.
This, that, in the social setting, and what's the environment? How do you change those things? Because that's how you get full recovery, but that's also how you can exist in life with a good mental, physical, social, spiritual surrounding. It just makes so much sense, and it's been important.
Absolutely, especially right now with everything that's going on.
Yeah.
So, Jack, I know you and I had a ton of other things we thought we might talk about, but we didn't get to.
Yeah.
I loved having you. Thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to kind of share with us. And hopefully everyone that attended, you got to just breathe a little bit and see some different perspectives. And hopefully you're going to focus on your routines, focus on your social connections, sharpen your saw, and just keep on saving the world like we've asked you to. Jack, thank you so much. I will see you soon. Maybe I'll ask you back for another wiener or webinar.
Please do. It's really been a pleasure, and reach out to me anytime, Jill, anybody, that's on the call wants to reach out to me if there's something I can do to help. You know where to find me.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much. We're going to sign off.
Okay. Take care.
Everybody, have a great day.